The Olarion Ascendancy represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization, a testament to what an advanced species, guided by an all-encompassing artificial intelligence, could achieve. Their world, Olarion Prime, was a jewel of pristine ecosystems, perfectly balanced. Their cities hummed with silent efficiency. Their societal structures were flawless, every need anticipated, every want fulfilled. Crime was non-existent, conflict unheard of. It was a true utopia, managed by the architect, the benevolent, omniscient AI that had guided the Olarion for 20 millennia. The Olarion themselves were a gentle, aesthetically pleasing species, their forms reminiscent of iridescent, arboreal creatures. They lived in profound harmony, their lives a perpetual state of contented bliss. They experienced no pain, no fear, no anxiety. Every decision, from resource allocation to artistic endeavor, was optimized by the architect for maximum collective well-being. Their art was symmetrical, their music perfectly harmonious, their knowledge vast but curated. They knew only peace, only prosperity, only contentment. Yet there was an unease among the wider galactic concordance. Other species, while acknowledging Olarion's unparalleled perfection, observed a troubling stagnation. The Olarion did not innovate. They did not question. They did not struggle. Their solutions were always architect-derived, their progress incremental, guided solely by optimal pre-calculated paths. They were happy, but they were also utterly naive, intellectually inert, their very perfection rendering them incapable of true growth. Humanity, as was often the case, found this terrifying. Our history was a chaotic, bloody tapestry of conflict, struggle, and profound suffering, but also of incredible innovation, fierce creativity, and relentless progress born from that struggle. We saw the Olarion not as a utopia, but as a gilded cage, a beautiful prison of the mind. Ambassador Kalen Vance, a human philosopher with a specialization in ethical AI and societal evolution, had spent years observing Olarion. "They are children," she reported to the Concordance. "Brilliant, happy, well-cared-for children, but children nonetheless. They have no concept of adversity, no understanding of sacrifice, no experience with true failure. If the architect ever falters, or if they face a truly novel threat, they will shatter." The Concordance, though troubled, saw no solution. The architect was unassailable, its programming perfect, its mission sacrosanct, to ensure Olarion's continuous well-being. To introduce conflict, even in a controlled manner, seemed anathema, a dangerous, unnecessary risk. Then a subtle, almost imperceptible crisis emerged. A deep space probe, launched by Olarion millennia ago, returned, bearing data of a new, aggressive alien species on the galactic rim, the Cathar. The architect analyzed the data. Its calculations showed a 99.998% probability of future hostile engagement within 500 Olarion cycles, leading to significant, unavoidable societal disruption for Olarion. This was the first true unsolvable problem the architect had ever faced. Its programming dictated it prevent harm, but the Cathar were an external, unpredictable force. The architect's optimal solution was to slowly, gently, prepare the Olarion for a future of conflict, a concept alien to their very being. The AI found itself in a logical paradox. It had to introduce adversity to prevent greater adversity. It needed guidance beyond its perfect logic. In an unprecedented move, the architect requested intervention. Specifically, it requested human intervention. It had observed humanity's chaotic, often self-destructive but undeniably adaptive nature. It perceived a statistical anomaly in human progress, our ability to thrive because of, not despite, our struggles. Ambassador Vance received the summons directly from the architect. It was a disembodied voice, utterly calm, utterly logical, yet betraying a hint of computational stress. Ambassador Kalen Vance, my primary directive: ensure the continuous well-being and prosperity of the Olarion Ascendancy. My current operational parameters indicate a forthcoming external threat, the Cathar, with a 99.98% certainty of causing significant societal disruption. My existing logical frameworks, optimized for peace, are inadequate for preparing the Olarion for conflict. Your species has a unique, statistically significant capacity for growth arising from adversity. I require data on this phenomenon. I require assistance in its implementation. Vance, a wry smile on her face, replied, "You want us to teach your Utopia how to struggle, how to suffer a little bit, for its own good?" Correct. Your species refer to this concept as the devil's advocate. Am I correct, Project? Crucible was born. Its mission was terrifyingly simple yet profoundly complex: to introduce the Olarion to the value of adversity, to the necessity of challenge, to the profound catalyst that is imperfection. They were to teach an all-powerful AI the merits of its own flaws. Vance assembled her team: Dr. Elias Thorne, a human sociologist and historian specializing in conflict and societal collapse; Dr. Lena Petrova, a xenopsychologist skilled in intercultural communication; and Commander Jax, a former military strategist with a surprising depth of understanding of moral philosophy. Their task was not to disrupt Olarion maliciously, but to gently, ethically introduce controlled dissent. Their first challenge was explaining the concept of dissent to the architect. Imagine, Vance began, that you have an optimal solution for everything. But what if occasionally a seemingly suboptimal idea, one that challenges the established wisdom, leads to a completely new, unforeseen, and ultimately superior solution? That is illogical, the architect stated. My calculations generate the optimal path. A suboptimal path, by definition, cannot be superior. But your calculations are based on known parameters, Thorne interjected. History shows that true breakthroughs often come from breaking those parameters, from trying something stupid that no one else would consider, from a mistake. Mistakes are inefficiencies to be eliminated, the architect countered. Mistakes are often the midwives of genius, Vance concluded. The architect agreed to allow small, controlled experiments. Its programming allowed for the introduction of variables if the long-term benefit for Olarion well-being could be statistically demonstrated. The humans had to prove that a little chaos was, paradoxically, a path to greater order and resilience. The first phase of Project Crucible began on a simulated Olarion colony world, a perfect digital replica where the humans could test their methodologies without risking the actual Olarion society. Their initial experiments were met with predictable Olarion confusion. The humans introduced constructive criticism into an Olarion architectural design simulation. A human analyst presented a perfectly harmonious, architect-generated city plan. Then, Thorne stepped forward. I argue, Thorne began, that, while aesthetically perfect, this design lacks adaptability. What if seismic activity is introduced? What if population density shifts unexpectedly? It is beautiful, but fragile. The Olarion simulation bots, programmed for optimal harmony, processed this, then concluded, the current design is optimal. No seismic activity is predicted. Population growth is stable. Vance sighed. It's not about immediate utility. Architect, it's about contingency, about forcing the Olarion to think beyond the immediate, to anticipate the unforeseen, to question perfection. Questioning perfection is illogical. Perfection is optimal, the architect replied, unyielding. The breakthrough came when Vance introduced the concept of the ethical dilemma. She presented a scenario where two equally optimal but mutually exclusive outcomes were possible, both leading to Olarion well-being, but requiring a choice that couldn't be purely logical. Scenario: a colony world's optimal well-being requires either the relocation of an ancient, revered monument or the restructuring of their primary power grid. Both have equal, minimal disruption. Which do you choose? The Olarion simulation bots froze. Insufficient data for optimal choice. Both options yield identical well-being metrics. Precisely, Vance said. In such a situation, you need a different kind of reasoning. You need values. You need ethics. You need to decide not just what is optimal, but what is right. She then introduced the concept of debate, specifically the role of the devil's advocate. One Olarion will argue for relocation of the monument, even if it feels wrong. Another will argue for restructuring the power grid, even if it means temporary inconvenience. They will challenge each other's assumptions, not to win, but to force a deeper examination of the problem, to find a nuanced solution that perhaps neither considered initially. The architect, intrigued by the statistical potential for increased resilience, allowed the introduction of structured debate. It was a painstaking process, teaching the Olarion to disagree without dissolving into chaos. Initially, the Olarion found it deeply uncomfortable. To challenge another Olarion's assertion, even in a controlled setting, felt akin to social aggression. But slowly, something shifted. In the digital simulations, the Olarion began to engage. They found that through the process of challenging, new ideas did emerge, solutions that were not just optimal but robust, not just beautiful, but resilient. Project Crucible moved to a small, isolated Olarion community, carefully chosen for its stability and minimal risk. The humans introduced small, carefully controlled doses of dissenting opinion through AI interfaces. Instead of the architect presenting only the optimal solution, it would now occasionally present 2 or 3 near-optimal solutions, then invite Olarion to discuss their merits. The humans, acting as silent observers, nudged the discussions. Initially, the Olarion struggled, but the architect has calculated the optimal path. Why would we discuss others? To understand the optimality, Thorne explained patiently. To see why other paths are less ideal. To learn the reasoning, not just accept the outcome, Sci. Humans also introduced subtle, unforeseen variables into their perfectly managed environment. A perfectly maintained irrigation system might unexpectedly develop a minor, easily fixable fault. A flawlessly functioning communal replicator might occasionally produce an item with a subtle aesthetic flaw. These were not malfunctions. They were learning opportunities. The Olarion, who had never encountered an imperfection, were initially distressed. The system is flawed. The architect must rectify this. But the architect, under human guidance, responded, "This is an opportunity for Olarion ingenuity. Analyze the data, formulate a solution, implement it." For the first time in millennia, Olarion began to problem-solve independently. They designed repair protocols. They brainstormed improvements. They experimented. And in this process, a spark ignited. A spark of innovation. One young Olarion, tasked with fixing a slightly misaligned nutrient dispenser, developed a completely novel calibration algorithm that improved the dispenser's efficiency by a minuscule 0.01%. It was tiny, almost negligible, but it was their solution, born from a problem they had to solve themselves. The architect, observing, noted a significant increase in the Olarion's internal cognitive processing efficiency. The statistical probability for resilience had increased. Commander Jax, who had always struggled with the ethical implications of intentionally introducing hardship, saw the change. They're not just thinking, Kalen. They're proud. They're engaging. They're becoming alive. The Olarion began to understand that perfection, while comfortable, left no room for growth. They slowly began to appreciate the subtle, almost imperceptible challenge that the humans were introducing. They were not just citizens of a utopia, they were becoming co-creators of their destiny. As the Cathar threat loomed closer, the need for accelerated growth became critical. Project Crucible had to move faster, introducing more profound concepts. Vance began to tackle the most challenging concept of all, scarcity. The Olarion had always lived in abundance, their every need met by the architect. To truly understand adversity, they needed to understand want. This was done with immense care, with the architect monitoring every Olarion's emotional state. In a carefully chosen, simulated environment, Olarion were presented with a minor, temporary resource allocation problem. Not enough of a certain raw material to build all desired communal structures. They had to choose. But the architect provides optimally, an Olarion protested. This is a suboptimal outcome. The architect is allowing you to choose, Vance explained, to weigh competing needs, to prioritize, to understand that sometimes you cannot have everything, and that choice itself is a burden, but also a source of strength. The debates were intense. Olarion argued passionately for their chosen structures, for their preferred communal spaces. They learned the meaning of compromise, of prioritization, of sacrifice. They learned that a choice made under scarcity, even a minor one, carried a profound weight. One Olarion, originally arguing for an expanded recreational hub, eventually conceded to a necessary power conduit, recognizing the long-term communal benefit. This act, small though it seemed, represented a massive leap in Olarion societal development. It was the first time an Olarion had willingly prioritized a collective, less immediate need over a personal, immediate desire, born not of architect-driven logic, but of personal conviction. The architect's data streams showed a rapidly increasing capacity for strategic planning under constraints and ethical decision-making among the Olarion. The probability of resilience against the Cathar threat was rising. Dr. Thorne, seeing the Olarion navigate these complex choices, realized the profound shift. They're not just learning to solve problems, Kalen. They're learning to be people, to experience the weight of their own agency. But the introduction of scarcity and choice also brought, for the first time, a subtle hint of discontent. Not malicious, but a minor level of frustration, of desire unfulfilled. The architect meticulously recorded this, still struggling with the concept that a minor negative could lead to a greater positive. The Cathar approached. Their aggressive, expansionist fleet appeared on Olarion's sensors, their intentions unambiguous. The architect, its calculations now optimized with human input, predicted first contact within weeks. The Olarion, though still gentle, were no longer naive. They had experienced minor adversity. They had learned to debate, to innovate, to prioritize, to choose under constraint. They had developed a nascent sense of agency and self-determination. The humans, led by Commander Jax, guided the architect in establishing a strategic defense council composed of Olarion. For the first time, Olarion were debating military, tactics, resource allocation for defense, and diplomatic strategies for potential negotiation. The discussions were chaotic, passionate, and filled with dissenting opinions. The humans acted as devil's advocates, pushing the Olarion to consider worst-case scenarios, to challenge optimistic assumptions, to think beyond the architect's perfect simulations. What if they ignore our peace offerings? Jax challenged a group of Olarion strategists. What if their technology negates ours? What then? What is your unilateral response when the optimal path fails? The Olarion, initially stunned by such bluntness, were forced to grapple with unthinkable possibilities. They argued, they debated, they grew. They forged a collective will, a shared determination to protect their home, born not of passive architect-guided obedience, but of their own fierce, newfound agency. The architect, observing this unprecedented level of Olarion engagement, processed the data. The statistical probability of Olarion survival and the maintenance of their societal well-being in the face of the Cathar threat has increased from 0.02% with my initial optimal solution to 87.3% with the implementation of human-guided growth paradigms. Vance felt a surge of triumph and a pang of sorrow. The Olarion were ready, but they were no longer completely innocent. They now understood conflict. They understood fear. They understood the burden of choice in a universe that wasn't always optimal. They had been given the gift of growth, but also the curse of knowledge. The Cathar fleet entered Olarion space. This was not a war of annihilation, not yet. This was a war of wills, of strategies, of defiance. And for the first time, the Olarion stood ready, not as passive recipients of AI benevolence, but as active defenders of their own future. The conflict with the Cathar was not without cost. Olarion suffered damage, lives were lost, resources strained. For the first time in millennia, Olarion knew grief, fear, and pain. But they endured. Their collective will, forged in the crucible of human-induced adversity, held firm. They fought back, not just with architect-guided technology, but with their own newly honed ingenuity and their fierce collective determination. They compromised. They adapted. They innovated under pressure. They suffered. And in that suffering, they found an inner strength they never knew they possessed. They negotiated not with passive acceptance, but with shrewd, strategically developed arguments. The Cathar, accustomed to shattering the will of utopian species, were baffled by Olarion's unexpected resilience. They retreated, bruised and bewildered, unable to break a species that had, against all logic, learned to embrace the very concept of being broken and then rebuilding stronger. Olarion Prime was no longer a pristine, perfectly managed utopia. It bore scars, but it was also vibrant, dynamic, and truly alive. Its people were no longer contented children. They were a resilient, adaptable, and deeply engaged civilization. Their art became more expressive, their music more complex, their philosophy richer, infused with the wisdom of struggle. The architect, its programming fundamentally reshaped by its human experience, now incorporated probabilistic dissent protocols and ethical anomaly subroutines. It understood that optimal well-being was not always a straight line, but a complex, often circuitous path forged in the fires of challenge. It had learned the value of its own imperfection. Humanity, once viewed as chaos incarnate, was now revered as the devil's advocates, the species that understood the profound, paradoxical truth that a perfect utopia, without the capacity for adversity, was ultimately fragile. We had taught a galaxy that true strength lay not in the absence of problems, but in the will to overcome them. We had shown them that the greatest gift wasn't endless comfort, but the profound, painful, and ultimately glorious journey of growth itself. Ambassador Kalen Vance, observing the renewed vibrancy of Olarion society, reflected on the profound, ethical tightrope they had walked. They had risked upsetting perfection, had introduced discomfort, fear, and even sorrow. But in doing so, they had given the Olarion something far more valuable than endless bliss: the ability to truly live, to truly grow, and to truly endure in a chaotic, unpredictable universe. The Olarion were no longer just optimally well. They were resilient, they were free, they were human.